Welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Joy.
Hi, Sally. It's good to be here with you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I think the topic of using Naviance to its full potential is a great one. But let's start by explaining what Naviance is. I realize that not everybody necessarily knows.
Sure. Naviance is pretty much an application management platform that different high schools can use to assist students with not only keeping track of their applications or the schools that they're interested in applying to, but can also give them some really good information and resources about researching colleges and finding a good match. It can also explore career interests. Naviance isn't the only management platform available to schools, but I think I would say it's the one that most schools use at the moment.
Yeah, I'll actually say that I put it into place at one of the high schools that I worked at because we were just using a spreadsheet and I was like, this is not working. This is horrible. Because we were trying to track data about our own students and too error prone, whereas Naviance really, just sort of much easier to keep the data clean, we found.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I should say that Joy was also a high school counselor. Did you use Naviance at your school?
I did. And if I didn't, I don't know if I would have made application deadlines in time. But it really did streamline the process for the counseling office that I worked in because we were able to submit letters of recommendation and transcripts electronically, which made it a lot easier for just making sure that documents were submitted and received by the different colleges.
And it makes it easy for students to look and see if those things have been submitted as well. So they can kind of
Definitely.
not panic and see that it made it in by the deadline. So, all right. So what would you say? So let's kind of switch over then to the student facing side of things. Like, what are some things that students should keep in mind in terms of using it to its full potential?
So I think for younger high school students, particularly ninth and 10th graders, the career tab in Naviance can be very helpful in helping them explore what different careers are out there and maybe what their interests might be well suited for. So there are career exploration resources that I would encourage younger students to use. Juniors and seniors can use that as well, but I think once you get into second semester of junior year, you're looking to use Naviance a little bit more to dig into managing your applications and also doing that college research. So one of the things that I really like on the student side of Naviance is they have this super match. And it's a questionnaire, if you will, that you can fill out that allows students to input their different interests in terms of not only major, and you can be undecided, Supermatch will still work if you don't have a major, but location. So if you want to be close to home or far away, you can select entire regions of the country or just individual states. You can determine the size of the school that you want to go to. It'll even give you selectivity range for admission. So schools that are highly selective, those that are very selective, and then even those that might have an open enrollment. And then depending on what the student inputs for their criteria, Naviance will generate a list of schools, and the super match even gives you kind of a percentage of how much of a match it is based on your interests. And then it has some high level information about schools as well as a link to the university's website. So you can learn more about it just by clicking that link. It'll direct you to an individual school's website. But one of the things that I really like about Naviance when I'm talking to students, Sally, is their scattergrams. And what a scattergram is, it's a graph that has the historical data for a student's high school of applications to a particular university. So for a certain period of time, when I was a college counselor, we used the last 5 years of data to show decisions. So it's helpful, it's a visual aid to say, am I in the ballpark? what are my chances of getting admitted? And I think that can be a lot more helpful to students than just saying, well, their acceptance rate is 33% or 75%, because that doesn't take a student's academic profile into account.
Or even when they have like the GPA average, because sometimes it's just the GPA average and the test score average, and that's still like not as helpful as the graph, the scattergram. Yeah.
So the scattergram, and I actually have a couple of examples for us to use. The scattergram just uses 2 data points, so GPA and either SAT or ACT score, to give kind of an average that's been admitted from that particular school.
Great. Yeah. And just for the people who are watching this on YouTube, Joy is going to share one of the graphs. And then for those of you who are just listening to this, we'll do our best to explain what we see.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen.
There we go.
Okay,
all right.
So this is a scattergram for the last 10 years, actually, to Penn State. And I'm taking this information from college coaches' data. So just to get a sense of what you're seeing is those green squares, those are students who applied to Penn State and have been admitted. The red X's are students who've applied but been denied. And then that blue diamond is an example of a student who has applied and been waitlisted. There are also some other squares and triangle combinations, like a green square and a yellow triangle means that that student has been accepted through early action. So this is a great way to see, based on a student's GPA and SAT score, where they might fall within the decisions from their high school that Penn State has made for over a period of time. So I've used just a GPA of a 3.93 and an SAT of a 1490. And I'm going to magnify a little bit. Do you see that getting bigger, Sally?
Definitely.
So you can see that there is a red circle right here. This is my profile. So I can see that I'm around a number of students that have been admitted through either regular decision or through early action. But so I can look and say, oh, I think I'm in the ballpark. Or I might even say, if I'm a student, I might say, oh, I've got, I'm in at Penn State. This is a safety. This is why I don't like to use the word safety or backup. If you see, I'm going to scroll a little bit bigger. Among all of these admits, there is a red X right there. That student was denied. So, and normally, just by looking at this, you would look and say, oh, why was that student denied? There's also a student up here that was denied early action. So this can help a student get a sense of that they're in the ballpark, but I think it also shows that nothing is a guarantee, and that, there are schools that should be in a probable category, a possible category, and then reach, so that you have a range of predictability of admissions on your college list.
Yeah, like I would even call this student, since most of the students got in, I would call it probable, but as you said, understand that it's not 100%. And this also, I think, does bring up some of the uncertainty. Maybe that's the student who was denied was applying into a highly selective major like engineering, for example, or computer science, something like that.
I would also agree with you that if I were counseling a student, I would identify Penn State for this student as a probable category or a probable outcome, but never would I say safety. So I have another scattergram. Let me see if I can bring this up.
Sure.
Can you see this one, Sally? I'm going to roll
Yep.
in a little bit
USC
more.
is right there.
This is USC, and I've decided to use examples of schools that are well known by students. So that's why Penn State is often a school that's on many students' lists. USC is also a school on many students' lists. So I'm using this example again to show where a student, a range of decisions, and this student, this profile that I've created for a student has an ACT instead of an SAT because students are submitting either score. And what I wanted to show is that there are a range of decisions, even close to where my students, my fictitious student falls, right around here, up here. This is the average over here for this set of students. But I want to call out this student right here, the student that's been admitted that is well below the average admitted profile. I call this one student out because oftentimes when I was working with students in the high school setting, if their circle was close to an acceptance like this, they would say, oh, I have a chance. There's someone else who's been admitted. But when you look at this overall, this student must have had some sort of something that distinguished them, that gave the admission committee the desire to admit the student because their profile is not like any other student around them. So if your profile in Naviance, or if you're using another platform, is more of an outlier and there's only maybe one other student near you, that school, I would say, would still be a reach because there had to be some sort of special interest in this student that outweighed everything else.
Right. Like I would say that student was likely either major donor, which I'm not talking about like alumni who gives $5,000 a year. I'm talking about really enormous sums of money beyond the reach of most of us, like, well beyond, or like recruited athlete, like someone who was really just absolutely a top athlete. Because I would say that this was not just a reach, but a reach plus for a student who didn't have one of those really compelling institutional priorities that we're going to get them in.
Exactly. And I think this could be hard to look at, especially if a school like USC is your top choice, but I think it's also an important conversation to have. So a student goes into any admission process with their eyes open and knowing what the likely outcome would be, no matter how disappointing it might be.
I think an interesting thing, if we can stay on this slide for just one more second, is how kind of all over the place the admits really are, right? Yes. So we're looking at a school like, there are some schools where also if you're like, I'll call this out, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but for example, if you're a dance major at NYU, obviously the academic demands are lower. It's really going to be audition based. I imagine that USC also has some of those. So recruited athlete, maybe a very talented artist of some kind, so keep those things in mind as well. The other thing too is that even if where your little circle is, that's where a lot of the students have been admitted, but it's still right next to the X's that say deny. So that means it's still a reach. Like in this situation, I would tell a student, go for it, but don't count on it. Like this is a reach school, even though your average is even higher than the accepted average.
Exactly. In my opinion, this school is a reach for this student. It's not a possible, just because of the data that we have showing the varied decisions around their statistics.
Yeah, there's even a student with who's on slightly like around the same GPA as the student example you give, which is like above around a 4.0, and that's unweighted, so perfect basically,
Mhm.
waitlisted and has a 36 on the ACT, not just a 34, and who was waitlisted and then denied. So
Yep.
these are the things that unfortunately students need to factor in, like these kinds of charts, scattergrams mean this school's a reach for everybody. And unless you have a special hook, you really shouldn't even bother unless you're up way up in that corner,
Right.
or you have a special talent or some kind of something.
And then there's one more thing, one more scattergram that I want to show you, and that is for an Ivy League school. I'm going to use the University of Pennsylvania. So I'm going to need to scroll in a whole lot here for you to be able to see. And I've done some high profile. This student, I've said, has a 3.9 GPA and a 1570 on the SAT. And the accepted average is a 3.94 and a 1543. So technically, this student is above the average. I don't know if you can even make it out, Sally, but there's the circle for this student. And there are so many decisions here that it's sort of black in color now. It's hard to make out. And I think I can see maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 yeses in that. And this is to show that, again, there are some students that are below that likely have some sort of special consideration. But this is to say, even students that are above the admitted student profile, it's an Ivy League school is a reach for every student. That's not to say you shouldn't if you've done the work and it's appropriate to put your application in a pool like this. There's nothing that says you can't, but you have to be aware of the likely outcomes. And Naviance can paint a picture for students that is very clear.
Yeah, this one says, given how few students are getting in, even those who are above the average of their average admits, this is a reach plus plus for everybody, just like an extreme reach. Yeah, I always tell students, again, yeah, I agree. It doesn't mean you can't have it on your list, but don't have your whole list look like this, and don't even have all your reaches look like this. Like throw in like a USC, even if you're a top student, like UPenn is the crazy reach, have a couple of those, and then have like the USCs, which are reach, but maybe not as crazy for a top student, and then balance it out. One of the things that I see that hopefully, if you look at your school's Naviance records, this will convince you not to do is, students who want to admit to kind of want to apply to like one safety and then everything else is these crazy reaches. Please don't do that. I promise you'll find great schools where the graphs are not as scary as these graphs.
Right.
Like Penn State as one example.
Right. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
But I hope that those give a few examples of how students can get a sense of if they're in the ballpark, and in helping them to create a balanced list. And certainly a student school counselor can help with that, because a school counselor will have, again, even more detailed information about, they might look and say, oh, I remember who that student was, or this is a special case because. So that can be, your school counselor is an additional resource to consider when trying to understand the data in Naviance.
Yes, please do use your school counselor, and know that they're not allowed to tell you who those students are who got in. They are not allowed to. That is confidential information, but they are allowed to tell you, you don't look like that student for various reasons. So I'd like you to be a little more cautious in your list. And please do listen to them when they say that. If you need to do a Hail Mary pass towards a big reach, go for it. But just, again, balance your list out, and yeah, have those good safeties on there as well, or reach school, or probables. Okay.
Exactly.
Got to get the terms right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joy.
Thanks, Sally. It's always great to chat with you.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a short break and then we'll be right back to talk to Vanessa about attending college as a first generation child of immigrants.